Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man, and joining me today is going to be Gordon James Gianninoto, and we're going to be talking about Planet X and the Poleshift. And for those of you that are listening out there in the chat room now, like you, Les, you might want to type in there for me if you don't mind, and let Raw Jay know that he might need to refresh and hit the player button since he's new here, so he'll be able to hear. I'd appreciate that. Thanks. At any rate, we're going to be talking about that and about Zeta Talk and a few other things. Me and Gordon, we go quite a way back in several different groups. We see each other post all the time. We, communicate to each other here and there. But out of my whole 5 years of doing this show, or 5.5 years, this is the first time that I've actually managed to get him on my show. And this guy's been on coast to coast, and I don't know what's taking me so long to get him over here. But, Gordon, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm pleased to be on your show, Royce. You've done a great job with your groups that you have and posting messages. And I know sometimes you and I get tangled up in these discussions where people don't like what other people say, and it's just never ending sometimes. But I really do appreciate, and I have been following you for a long time, and I guess you've been following me for a long time. And this is the first time, but I'm very pleased to be here, so I'm excited.
Well, I'm actually pleased to have you here, and I know that you have been involved with Nancy Leader's Zeta Talk for many, many, many years now yourself.
6 years, yeah.
And actually, you had the same theories that she did before you got involved with her show, didn't you?
Yes, exactly, and that's why she started that website in. Well, let me say who she is first of all. She's a woman in Wisconsin, a poor farmer, a very nice woman. She's got a kind of a tough exterior, so she doesn't put up with a lot of BS. But she, in 1995, she started taking questions from the public and telepathically asking them to the 100% human, unselfish Zetas who are here on Earth now in the fourth dimension, the next level up. And she telepathically asked questions from the public and then typed out their answers. And she has a website called zetatalk.com, and it's got 39,000 pages of questions from the public and answers from extraterrestrials. And Nancy gets upset if you ask the same question twice, so you don't want to do that. You really want to start reading Zeta Talk because that's where all the information is. And the thing is, I started looking at it in 1995 when it first came out, and I said, well, I know all of that, and I never went back. But in 2006, Janet and I were saying, who's saying exactly what we're saying? And we started looking around at all these different sites, and we went back to it, and I went, oh, my God, she and I, Nancy Leader and I, are saying exactly the same thing. So I started following it, and I'm not like, it's not like a cult. You don't pay money. You don't give money. It's nothing like, I've heard every negative thing you can say about anybody said about Nancy, and almost as many negative things said about me. But, anyway, it's a wonderful site. And if anything I say interests you, besides all the various things I've said and written, if you do a Google search, for instance, UFO Digest publishes practically every email I write gets posted on, UFO Digest. And they do a wonderful job, Robert Morningstar and Dirk. So
UFO Digest is Robert Morningstar's website?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Thanks.
Yeah. So anyway, and people just attack all the time. In one sense, there's a big government cover-up. So obviously the leaders of the world are all reading Zeta Talk. All the members of Congress are reading Zeta Talk, and they're whispering about it in the halls of Congress. And if they start talking about it outside of Congress, then they get They don't come down, as Howie Carr in Boston, the columnist, says, they don't come down for breakfast the next day. And that's Senator Stevens in Alaska started talking too much publicly. And wouldn't you know it, he died in a plane crash. So, you really got to be careful if you want to play the power game with the elite, and then you want to start talking about what they say should be secret. Now, of course, I'm not part of the elite, so I'm going to just say what the hell I think is the truth, and you can evaluate it for yourself.
Actually, now that you mention that, this could just be a bad memory, but didn't you and George Norrie have words one time about a difference of view of opinions and both of y'all being outspoken?
No, I never had a problem with George, actually. It's funny because I didn't meet his aunt, but and this should be of interest for those who are interested in the paranormal, is I taught myself telepathy. Now, you can't go to school for it, and I don't really know how to tell anybody exactly how to do it, but the point is you've got to become sensitive to other people. You have to be able to empathetically put yourself in other people's shoes and attune yourself. So these are words that, there aren't any definitions of them, and it's not like you can go to class for it. But the people who know who's calling when the phone rings before they pick it up, they know what I mean. And when you're in a close relationship and you've got a really close relationship with your spouse or a really good friend and you know what the other's thinking, that's sort of the beginning of it. And you just got to start practicing that and tuning into people. And so anyway, I had, for people who don't know who I am, I'm not selling anything. I don't have a website. I don't have any books. So I'm not doing this for money. It's because this is very exciting information as far as I'm concerned, and I can't wait to share it with everybody. In terms of my background, my father was the inventor of the field of package design and industrial design. And his most famous product that he ever did was he invented the flip-top box for cigarettes, and he did the package for Marlboro. And that by itself is the single most valuable brand in the entire world, and it was my father that came up with it. 80% of the women that look at the package see a house, and 90% of the men see a mountain. Since the day it came out, it's been the number one brand in the world, without a doubt, and the second most valuable brand, in case you care, is Budweiser beer.
I tell you what, I quit smoking and drinking 3 years or 3.5 years ago, so actually it'll be 4 years in July.
Well, you're a smart man, because the alcohol will not help with telepathy or being psychic. I can tell you that right now. I still smoke cigarettes though, so. But,
those cigarettes.
In this case, my father, he got paid very little for designing that package for Philip Morris, but he eventually did become a multimillionaire. And he always said, well, when I die, it'll be your your brother, your sisters, and your money. But then when he died, his accountant stole it all. So this was years before, that guy in New York City that had the Bernie Madoff, yeah. Before him, but it was the same result. So my father said, until then, you're on your own. I grew up poor, and if you want any money, you work. So I started working at age 11. So when his accountant finally stole his estate once my father died, there wasn't any money. So I don't want anybody thinking, well, this is a guy with millions of dollars. I live in a cabin on a mountaintop on the coast of Maine with no plumbing, and I heat with wood that I cut and split myself. So I'm doing the things that I'm going to be telling your listeners to do because of Poleshift. But I was a very bright student in high school. I graduated at the top of my class. College, I graduated at the top of my class. And law school, I graduated at the top of my class. And the whole time I paid for it by working as a contractor. And when I graduated from law school, I had never had a school loan, and I didn't owe any money to anybody. I was completely caught up. So I am a hardworking person. Now, when I was a young guy, I was very interested in earth science and science in general, and I was interested in aerospace engineering, and I would design and build model airplanes, gasoline-powered model airplanes. I never would buy a kit and follow the instructions. I just designed it myself, and they always worked. And then I started building 1, 2, and 3 stage rockets. The first money I ever made when I was 11, I bought a telescope and started watching the sky. And my father was Catholic, and he was married 5 times, and my mother was his 3rd wife. Well, when he was divorced the first time, they said, well, you can't take communion, you're excommunicated. And he thought, how can God kick you out of church? So now this is long before I was born. He started buying books on UFOs, telepathy, extraterrestrials, ghosts, reincarnation, Roswell, all these things. So when I was growing up, the books that were in the house for me to read were about Roswell and ETs and dimensions and masters and ascension and all this stuff. So that was, and turns out it was a great interest of mine, and nobody else in the family was interested. So over the years, my father and I became closer than father-son, closer than brothers, closer than best friends, and we could just sit together for hours talking about this stuff. So I did grow up with not only a tremendous interest in it, but somebody to share it with. So in that sense, I was not the black sheep of my family, whereas I know a lot of your listeners, as soon as they start talking about this stuff, their spouses or their kids or their parents think, well, you ought to have your medication adjusted. It's
well, yeah, I've had to have my medication adjusted when I was a young child too, but not for that reason. I actually didn't get involved in some of this stuff until I was in my 20s or so. But I'm glad that you had an earlier start because you had time to build up more information. But I think maybe a good place we can start this, Gordon, is why don't we tell them about Planet X and the Poleshift and, you know, the part they play in making all this other stuff to prepare, you know, necessary. And what part does Planet X play in the Poleshift?
Okay. Planet X is the modern name for the planet Nibiru, which is the ancient Sumerian name for a planet that trails twin strands of moons, rocks, dust, and petroleum oily. So it's an oily dust. It's an iron ore oxide dust. Planet X is a planet that's approximately 29,000 miles in diameter, and it's oceanic. It's got oceans, deep oceans on it. It's got volcanic rifts, and it has tall, selfish humans. And it comes through the solar system every 3,657 years. The last time it came through is in the Old Testament. You can actually read about it in the part that's Joshua, the book of Joshua, chapter 10. Joshua says, the sun rose that day and did circles in the sky and set in a new direction. And he says that there never was a day like this before, and there'll never be a day like this again, which, of course, how in the hell would he know? So it's in the Old Testament, and the time before that, and that was 1650 BC. The time before that was the flood of Noah, and the time before that was the sinking of Atlantis. So this is something that happens regularly every 3,657 years, and it comes closer or farther from the Earth each time and causes minor or major pole shift. Now, the last pole shift in 1650 BC moved the North Pole from Greenland to the Arctic, so that's about 12 degrees. But this pole shift is going to be major. The new North Pole is going to be the eastern tip of Brazil, right where the city of Recife is. You go 100 miles offshore, and that will be the new North Pole. So this is something that happens regularly, and there's no amount of humming like, you know, you see a lot of people say, well, if we all think wonderful thoughts, this won't happen. Well, this is like going down to the beach at low tide and humming and hoping that the tide isn't going to come back in. And, of course, it is going to come back in. And so this is a natural event. If you're interested, you can read the books of Zechariah Sitchin, translates the ancient Sumerian tablets, and they say that the Anunnaki first came here about 1 million years ago to mine gold. And they were mining gold for about 400,000 years when they said, oh, my God, why don't we use genetics to create a bunch of slaves who would be great gold miners, and let's dumb them down so they make great slaves, but they're not smart enough to realize that we aren't God, and we'll pretend to be their gods. And we'll use fear and every negative thing to enforce us being gods. And so you can read all about this in the Anunnaki. And I don't want to get into a discussion of religion, but if you really look at that information from the ancient Sumerian tablets, there's thousands and thousands of them, and most of them were found and translated by German, English, and French archaeologists over 150 years ago. So they were sitting there, and of course, 150 years ago, they didn't know about space travel. They didn't even know about flight. So they were reading a lot of these things, and they translated them according to what they knew 150 years ago. It was Zecharia Sitchin that went back and goes, oh my God, these people are talking about spaceships. They're talking about extraterrestrials. And so he went through them all and retranslated them and wrote a series of, I think it's 8 or 9 books that are quite available. Unfortunately, Zecharia died 2 years ago. But I had called him up personally to talk to him, and he said, I'm not talking to you. And I said, why? And he said, well, if you tell me something and I later put it in one of my books, whether I intend to or I do it accidentally, then you might sue me, and I don't need any more lawsuits, so I'm not talking to you. So that was kind of harsh. But
sounds harsh.
But anyway, they came here and created lots of Adams and Eves and experimented, and then they had us all mine gold. Well, Google Earth they've discovered so much stuff looking at satellite pictures of Earth. They discovered near the major gold fields on planet Earth in South Africa, they're the ruins of a city that are of at least 250,000 years old, and the city's 250 miles by 150 miles. And it's made of stone, and it's right next to the gold fields. And that's obviously, it had a population of up to 2 million people. And that was obviously what they did for mining gold. And evidently they make it into a powder and put it in their upper atmosphere, because when they leave the solar system, it can get cold in space, not being near a sun or a star. And so they use that to insulate the planet. But because it's such a big planet and it has such deep oceans, it does stay warmer than you would think, but it is a 3,657 year cycle before it goes away and comes back. And this is the period we're in right now. They're back.
Right.
So they are banned since the Old Testament, since Jehovah was the last evil, selfish, extraterrestrial pretend god that we had. And they are banned from coming back. And they aren't banned in the same way that they got a notice from Central saying, here's your official notice, don't try to go to Earth. Instead, every time they try and come to Earth, wouldn't you know it, something goes wrong. Electrical short, navigation problem with the propulsion, whatever. So they finally realized that there's just no way they can come here. Now, most people who first heard of Planet X also heard in the Bible of the phrase wormwood.
Yes, I think everybody, that's in Revelation.
Right, and the thing is that's the same subject, but people have interpreted that this is a red dwarf star, 18 times the size of Jupiter, that's going to come into the solar system at some point, and even Zecharia Sitchin thought it wouldn't return for another 200 years. So the thing is, the federal government has known all along that this would happen. NASA, there's clear evidence that the people who formed NASA knew 60 years ago that Planet X was coming back. In fact, it's said that when they recovered the live alien at Roswell and took him into captivity, at that point they realized that there would be this huge calamity, this catastrophe, this apocalypse of Planet X returning, and that they've been preparing ever since. The NASA patch, interestingly enough, shows Orion on the patch, and Orion is the direction that Planet X comes from when it reapproaches the solar system. So in 1983, NASA sent up this infrared satellite called the IRIS satellite, IRAS, to look for it. And they, being that it might be considered a dwarf star, which, as I just said, it's not. It's a planet and it's inhabited. That they would find it with an infrared satellite, and they found it. And in December of 1983, NASA and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory had a joint press conference where they announced to the entire world, and it was in all the national newspapers, the New York Times, the Washington Post, that they were searching for Planet X and that they had found it. And it was front page news. And the very next day, there was another announcement. Whoops, we didn't find it. We're still looking for it. So when was the last time that anybody heard NASA and JPL? And for those of you who aren't aware, Jet Propulsion Laboratory was actually started by this guy, Jack Parsons. So it's also considered that it was the Jack Parsons lab. And he's a whole mystery himself. They say he died in an explosion, but they never found his body. So it's a good issue as to where he went and what became of him. But the Jet Propulsion Laboratory does all the math. NASA is basically a huge bureaucracy, and they build things and launch them, but they don't have a clue how to navigate them or where to go. And all the mathematics for the whole thing is always done by JPL. And they were the first institute or laboratory in the United States to start building rocket engines and launching missiles professionally as a full-time thing. So when NASA and JPL get together, it's NASA saying, this is our branch. It's a separate entity, but this is our associate who does all of our research. And they say, and we agree that we found Planet X. So that night, everybody must have said, well, there's Planet X. It's coming in. What does that mean? And they must have just gulped and go, oh, my God, we can't tell anybody what that means. And so they buried it, and that's been a cover-up that's at least 60 years old. It at least goes back to 1947, and there's a lot of evidence that especially the U.S. Navy had recovered crashed saucers and met ETs even earlier than that, even possibly back as far as the year 1900, but certainly in the 1930s. So Roswell, although most people think of that as the first real case because it got all the publicity, there are actually a lot of evidence. For instance, that case in Missouri, Cape Girardeau, I think it's called, in 1941. So there's a lot of evidence that they've known for a long time. But the thing is that you have to understand is that it's not any different up there as it is down here. You have some of the most selfish people anywhere in the universe are walking around on Earth. They're human. And up there you have selfish and unselfish. So like attracts like. So believe it or not, the U.S. government, which I don't think anyone would find this hard to believe, the U.S. government, when they contacted extraterrestrials, the ones who contacted them were the selfish extraterrestrials. So I personally do not believe that there will ever be disclosure, because as long as the people are alive who helped make deals with selfish ETs, there's never going to be any discussion of that. But the unselfish extraterrestrials had only one choice, and that was to contact people individually. So although I was able to contact people from the Pleiades and from Zeta Reticuli myself, it isn't because I'm the only one in the world who's done this, or I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread. This is something that every single one of you can do, because they can't contact you. It's like there's this rule that they can't contact you unless you ask for contact. Now, if you're an unselfish person, by that I mean that 51% of the time you put yourself in other people's shoes, you have empathy for other people. If you're that kind of a person, then the ones who are going to contact you are the unselfish extraterrestrials. And if you're a very selfish person, you're going to be contacted by people who use fear and cruelty and power to inspire awe and obedience. So you definitely, if you're selfish, you don't want to be asking for contact with extraterrestrials. But if you're unselfish, you can have that tonight. All you've got to do is take a walk outside, look up at the sky and say, if there's any unselfish good extraterrestrials out there, please contact me. Because
I believe that's what James Gianninoto did.
Well, that's the point, and that's what I've done, and so many millions of other people have done, and they've had all these experiences. Now, Janet and I had a UFO group in Bangor, Maine. For 18 years, we met every month, and we had all kinds of people come and go and stay in the group, and it sort of eventually petered out, and we just stopped doing it. But there are a lot of people who are quite interested in contacting extraterrestrials and seeing ships and realizing. And you've got to look at it this way. There's no physical evidence. I can't tell you, Royce, how many times people say, well, I don't believe a word you're saying. Where's your proof? And I'm saying, well, what am I supposed to do? And next time I'm up in a ship, like break off a piece of their control panel and hide it on my body and take it back so I can show you when you ask me. I mean, how many incidents have been reported that we know of? It's got to be millions. And then you have people walking around with cameras, video cameras, shooting pictures, and the number of images and movies on YouTube and all these UFO sites is just unbelievable. And yet there's no physical proof. Isn't that by itself proof that there must be a rule concerning this, that there's no extraterrestrial evidence on Earth? Could that be a coincidence that many people say they're in contact, and that many people take pictures, and that many videos are shot, and that many incidents are reported, and yet there's no? Isn't that show that the extraterrestrials are like unbelievably thorough in making sure there's no physical evidence?
Actually, there is that piece by Bob White. Now, he's been on my show. He said this piece jettisoned off of a UFO, and according to him, he's had this thing run tests, and it does not come up as having been made here on Earth. And according to him, it matches a piece that the government holds.
Well,
but that's a rare piece.
Right. You see, I mean, you're talking millions of incidents, and you're talking maybe a couple of pieces that are of dubious heritage. But the thing is you've got to understand that there's a dimensional level. In other words, people argue over whether there's such a thing as reincarnation or not. Now, I remember a few, not all my lifetimes, but I remember a few lifetimes on Earth as clearly as other people remember last week. So for me, there's absolutely no question. And this is what I think happens is that, and this is a way of understanding it. You may like what I'm about to say or not, but let's say that you're the creator and you're sitting there and you haven't created the universe yet. And you're sitting there and you're thinking, well, I know everything. I am everything. I can do everything. How do I take myself to my own next level? And then you get this brilliant idea. You say, well, what if I create a universe and I divide my own body into trillions and trillions of cells and set each one of the cells free on its own to develop and grow, and until each part of my body becomes as totally all-knowing and all-powerful and all-understanding as I am now, and then I get all those pieces back together to form a new me, then I will have taken my own self to my next higher step. So that's an analogy of how I understand life. So for me, I don't see the Creator as a God on a throne. I see the Creator as more like light. And I see us as being eternal souls, where the connection between our eternal soul is in our heart, a little blue flame in our heart. So there are many lifetimes where we're born on a planet, we live, and then we die. And if you could look at all the lifetimes you've lived, they would look like grains of sand on an endless beach. And the amusing part about this level, which I'll call the third dimension, this Earth here, has a lot of interesting things to it. One of them is that there's sort of a veil to prevent you from being aware of that. So you don't really understand that you're an eternal soul, and you don't remember your previous lifetimes, or things you've done good or bad, either way. And you're just born here, and it's like every time you have to start over almost from scratch. And anything that you do remember from another time or place is really hard fought for and hard to win, but you can achieve it. And not only that I remember some of my previous lifetimes, but I know other people who do as well. So, it's like reincarnation was one of the things they took out of the Bible. And it's interesting that at the time that Jesus was born, a third of the earth believed in reincarnation. And yet, in the whole gospel, if you read through it, you don't find reincarnation mentioned anywhere. Now, you would think if it was wrong, that Jesus would have taken the time to speak out against it, because he certainly didn't mince words when he found other things to be wrong, and he spoke on every subject there is. And he never once mentioned reincarnation, and either he mentioned it and it was cut out of the Bible, or he intentionally never mentioned it. But if you look through history, you see all the gods before Jesus used sacrifice to worship as part of worship. You either killed an animal or you killed another human being in order to worship God. Well, right there, that should tell you that this isn't God. What God would do that? And so the interesting thing about Jesus, who I firmly believe in, and I'm not religious, I'm spiritual, if there's a difference, and I think there is, every single God up until Jesus required sacrifice. And Jesus said, if you believe in me, if you want to contact the higher levels, you don't need to kill something. I don't want to see any more sacrifices from now on. And this was a brand new thing. And to carry it on as a tradition, you have in the Christian church, you have the taking of communion, which is symbolic blood and symbolic body through the wine and the wafers, but it's not actual killing. Whereas if you look at the Aztecs, they had pyramids where they just had lines of slaves miles long, and they would just one by one get them to the top and rip their hearts out, and sort of as an offering to God. Well, what in the hell is that? And then you look at the Mayans, and everybody says, well, 2012, that's going to be the end of the year of the calendar. But it's the end of an age, not the end of the earth. It's the beginning of a new beginning. And every time Poleshift comes, record keeping goes to hell. So you can see that, we talk about we were living as cavemen 10,000 years ago. Well, the archaeologists know that we weren't. They know that there were advanced societies going back hundreds of thousands of years. If you look at genetics, you see that all mankind can be traced from one woman in Africa 400,000 years ago, and that's from the Anunnaki breeding us as slaves. So there wasn't one Adam or one Eve. There was a selfish group pretending to be God who came down to the earth, and they were humans, and they were selfish. They couldn't get along with each other. They were marrying their brothers and sisters. They were all inbred. They were 7 to 12 feet tall. And just in the first book of Genesis, where it says there were giants in the earth, well, that's one translation. The other translation is men from above. So they came here to do that. So the thing is Planet X is not a dwarf star. It looks like a dwarf star, and the reason why is because it has huge open volcanic rifts, and it is always cloudy. It's very rare for the Anunnaki, the selfish humans on Planet X, to see the stars, to see the sky. So you have these volcanic rifts sending out this orange, dull red color from the surface up into the clouds. So when we finally do get to see it in our skies, which could be as early as a year from now, when we do, it is going to look like a dwarf star, but it isn't a dwarf star. It's inhabited, and it has a 5 million long mile tail that glows, being backlit from the sun, and that ripples. So it's going to look like this huge dragon ball going through the sky, followed by a serpentine tail. And in fact, the ancient Chinese have preserved the tradition of Planet X coming through with every single Chinese parade. I don't care where in the world you go to watch a Chinese parade, the first thing at the head of the parade is the dragon ball, followed by the dragon tail. And that's a way, without using writing, of keeping the history of Planet X's return to Earth alive in the memories of people.
Well, one of the things I would have to wonder about is if all this is spewing in the air, and this is hot lava, am I correct?
Well, yeah, it's open volcanic rifts on Planet X, on Nibiru.
So what keeps the inhabitants from getting burnt in the fallout of it?
Well, it's a 29,000 mile diameter planet. It's got, it's 4 times the size of Earth. It's got huge land areas, more than enough to support them.
Okay, and the actual traveling to the solar system is not dangerous to the inhabitants either?
No, they keep their atmosphere, and they get, when they're near the sun, it warms the oceans, and the ocean's very deep, and there's a lot of water, and that warmth stays with them as they go out into space. Now, NASA has never found, it has been looking, but it's never found not a twin, but another star that would make our solar system a binary system. And, but evidently that's why Planet X comes back. So this is a natural thing. It repeats every 3,657 years. It goes through our solar system, then it zooms back around this other star, which is dead, which is one reason why nobody's seen it, because it isn't bright. It can't be spotted. It doesn't have any heat. It's just a dead star. Goes around the dead star and then heads back to the Earth. So now that the Anunnaki are banned from mining gold on the Earth, they've been mining it off the dark twin of Earth and of Mars, particularly the moon Phobos is one huge gold nugget, and they've been mining it there, and they've been kept away. But in the meantime, Earth was selected as a very special place by other fourth dimensional extraterrestrials. And you could look at ghosts as people that you can't really see with your eye. You can maybe see them out of the corner of your eye, but it's very hard to see a ghost. Sometimes a camera will record a picture of a ghost, but you don't normally go around seeing ghosts. But in the same way, that's a level below our frequency. So we're in this third dimensional world, let's call it. And then below that level, you have this lower level of ghosts. And above it, you have this fourth dimensional world of extraterrestrials. So on the third dimensional world that we live in now, we have a rule where selfish and unselfish are allowed unlimited mixing. So as you know, every time somebody unselfish gets a really good idea and tries to implement it and bring it to fruition, somebody selfish comes along and ruins it. So that's the story of what's going on the dimension that we're on now. But what's interesting about Poleshift is that this is the last time that the Earth will be a third dimensional planet. When Planet X comes back through the solar system, the Earth will have become a fourth dimensional planet. And the Earth will not be here. They're going to look at, and they're going to go, where in the hell did Earth go? And that's because we're ready to graduate. And by that I mean, the Earth is selected as a way out of the way place to have an experiment. And if you're aware of the science of it, the universe is 16 billion years old and the Earth is only 4 billion years old. So there are actually people who are born on Earth who have been born and lived lifetimes on other planets. And a lot of these civilizations, they don't have the mix of the selfish and unselfish that we do. So just to get out of bed in the morning, the average person on Earth, if they were from another planet where nothing had changed in 100,000 years, if nothing had changed in 1,000,000 years or 10 million years, and everything was just peachy every day, all day long, and then you came to Earth and you had to deal with all these people, you'd probably have a heart attack before you could even get out of bed. So Earth is a really special place, and what happened is an experiment was designed where representatives of every single unresolved problem across the universe volunteered to be born on Earth to resolve those problems. And I'd love to say, I'm happy to say, that those problems have been resolved. Now, all of them. And it's not just physical things like surviving extreme heat or surviving extreme cold. It's things like slavery, like man versus woman, like general mistreatment. I mean, every issue that you see, all the negative emotions, greed, jealousy, every possible problem anywhere in the universe, representatives of both sides of it volunteered to be born on Earth. And because of that, there are a lot of extraterrestrials here. Now, one reason why they're here is because if you, Royce, had spent 10 lifetimes in the Pleiades and then you volunteered to be born on Earth, of course, your good buddies, the people you lived with and worked with and got to know in the Pleiades, would love to come to Earth. And, of course, they have the technology to do that, to come to Earth, to drop in on you and visit you. Just like if you sent your kids off to a boarding school, you would drive over there every so often to look at them in person and see how they're doing. So, in a sense, we have extraterrestrials from all over the universe here because they are familiar with some of the people who are here on Earth, who think that they're Earth human, and they are, but they've lived on these other worlds in previous lives, and those people know them. There are altogether about 1,000 extraterrestrial races here on Earth at the present time. And for the purposes of Poleshift, 40 of the groups, 40 of the races, the extraterrestrial races, have agreed to divide up the Earth for guidance for Poleshift. And the Zetas are the ones who took North America. So if you are going to contact extraterrestrials, the ones you're going to be contacting are the Zetas because they're the ones who took North America. It doesn't mean there aren't other races or that you might not have lived in a different civilization, perhaps Arcturus or Andromeda or the Pleiades, but just that so that there's no duplication of effort, that 40 different extraterrestrial groups who are most similar and best acquainted with Earth humans divided up the Earth to provide guidance at this time. So first of all, we have a natural event, the return of Planet X, about which you can do nothing. It's going to come, it's here, and it's about to cause Poleshift. But at the same time, you have about a third of the Earth is ready to graduate to a new higher level, the fourth dimension. And in the aftertime, about 100 years after Poleshift, the Earth itself is going to graduate. Now, in the fourth dimension, there's no mixing of selfish and unselfish. There's only complete separation. So you've got three different groups. You've got the people that have made a conscious choice to be selfish, and that's about 10% of the population. And that's somebody that would pull out a gun at a shopping mall and shoot 40 people. And then you've got 35% of the population has made a conscious choice to be unselfish, and that means they don't have to be saints like Mother Teresa, but 51% of the time they think of the other person first. And so then the total of those two is 45%. So what about the other 55%? Well, the other 55% are what you call the undecided. They haven't lived enough lifetimes, and by that I mean the average person lives 1,000 lifetimes before they get the idea, oh, I should orient all my behavior around being selfish, or I should orient all my behavior around being unselfish. So those people, the 55%, they're not graduating to the fourth dimension. They are going to be reborn as a gift to them as sea creatures on other third dimensional planets. And the question is, why sea creatures? And the answer is that if you look around you in today's world, you see that the problem of most people that blocks them from being unselfish is possessions. People have let possessions become more important than other people. So to speed up their evolutionary growth, those people who haven't decided to become completely selfish or completely unselfish are going to be reborn as sea creatures without any possessions. And then they're going to have to face their moral and psychological decisions without property. And that will make it easier for them because obviously property has confused a lot of people in today's world.
Now, where are you getting the information that these people will be reborn as sea people from? Is this channeled information?
Yeah, from the Zetas, but also, you see, as a child, I started to become interested in like how you would know what the truth is. And you know, you've heard of voice stress analyzers, like if somebody's lying, their voice cracks in a funny kind of a way.
I've heard of that.
Yeah. So the thing is your soul doesn't like lies. So your soul will actually convey the truth. So like if somebody's sitting in front of you and you said, where were you at 1 o'clock last night? And they said, oh, I was over at my brother's house. And they sniffed. The sniff is your soul taking it back. It doesn't mean that they weren't over at their brother's house, but it means that if you were to ask a few more questions, you would learn that there was something about that they didn't say that would be very important to your opinion of what they were doing last night. So maybe it's your wife. You're asking, where were you? And she says, well, I was at my brother's house. And then she goes, sniffs. That's your soul, her soul taking it back. So then you ask another question, and it turns out she was meeting her new boyfriend over at her brother's house. I'm not saying that everyone that sniffs is lying, but the thing is when somebody sniffs, they're taking it back. Well, there's other ways of doing that. And another one is somebody that's talking to you and you say, are you almost finished with my project? And they go, certainly. And then they sniff and they also put their finger up to their nose and start rubbing their nose. Well, if the person's being honest, there's a complete flow of energy between their face and your face. So if they put their finger up to their nose, they're showing you that there's a blockage and that there's something that's not true about what they said, that they left something out. So you can use this in your everyday life, and it's just amazing because even people that want to lie find that they can't. So somebody you'll ask somebody something where you know that they're lying, but they don't know you know, and you'll watch them. They'll sniff, they'll go, yeah, blah, blah, blah. They'll sniff to take it back, and or they'll put their finger up to their face and block their face. So
now, I've heard tell that almost everybody has what they call a tell. And it could be a sniff, it could be a finger to the nose, it could be an ear twitch or a twitch of the mouth or...
Exactly. And this is, if you're interested in this subject, for the listeners, if you're interested in this subject, then go study body language because it's just mind-boggling what you can tell. So I became interested in that at an early age. And then I heard about this voice stress analyzing, and I was like, well, I'm going to say Poleshift will happen, and then I'm going to say Poleshift is not going to happen. And then I'm going to listen to my own voice, and I'm going to tune my ears to listen to which of those two things had the stress, because with the voice cracking and the voice changing. So I learned gradually how to tell if something was true. And it's, a lot of people, they think with their brains, which sounds like what you should be doing. But the thing is the connection to your eternal self, and your eternal self knows all the truth of everything that ever was and everything that ever will be. And it knows the answer to every single question. So when you ask your heart, so your mind says, well, that could be true, but your heart says, I don't believe it. Trust your heart, because your heart is the key to your eternal self that does know all. So one thing that's going to be different after the earth graduates to the fourth dimension is there will be no more deceit. And this is really in the book of Revelation, that the meek shall inherit the earth. It doesn't mean the stupid. It means the gentle souls who are capable of empathy, that care about other people first. But that's what it's talking about. And that's, an archaic way of putting it, but that's what it's talking about. So you're going to have the selfish people graduate to the fourth dimension, believe it or not. But guess what? there's planets where every single person on that planet is more selfish than the selfish people. So they're going to die, like we're all going to die, and we're all going to be reborn somewhere. And the selfish people are going to be reborn on what I call prison planets, where every single person is more selfish than they are. And they're going to live their dream. That's the life they planned and lived here on Earth in the third dimension. So that's what they get in the fourth dimension. And people who have made a conscious choice to be unselfish are going to be reborn on planets where not one single selfish person will be allowed to be born. And that's what the Earth is going to be for 1,000 years. And that's the promise of the Book of Revelation, and that's really what it's talking about. And then the undecideds are just going to go to other third-dimensional planets, not the Earth, because it won't be a third-dimensional planet anymore. It'll be a fourth-dimensional planet. And they will go there and be sea creatures, and hopefully they'll catch up later. Now, the interesting thing is that everything is a progression. So there is a fifth dimension, and there's dimensions above that. There are dimensions as far off into the distance as you can imagine. Maybe the 22nd dimension, the 100th dimension. So the fifth dimension, the next dimension after the fourth, all is one. So it's like when you reach a certain point, you come to a fork in the road. On one side of the fork, it's to choose selfishness. And the other side of the fork is to choose unselfishness. So when you choose selfishness, you're creating a hell for yourself because you're going to be reborn on selfish planets with other selfish people. How are you ever going to learn in that environment how to be unselfish? But when you choose the unselfish path, you're already most of the way there to the fifth dimension where all is one. So you could say that making a conscious choice to put other people first most of the time, and I'm not talking about being stupid and just servicing people because they want to be serviced. That's not being unselfish. That's being stupid. You know, just because somebody expects you to service them doesn't mean that that's the right thing for you to do, is to do what they ask. But the point is, the people that are on the fourth dimensional planet of selfishness, in a prison planet, and everyone's more selfish than they are, how many lifetimes are they going to have to live? How many thousands of lifetimes are they going to have to live before they finally achieve unselfishness in an environment where you're immediately punished or killed for being unselfish for even a second? So that's their problem. I'm talking to the people among your listeners who are kind-hearted, empathetic, and are able to put themselves in somebody else's shoes. Selfish people can do that, but they shut it off. They block it because they think, well, I'm important. I should be number one. I'm not going to bother feeling what the other person does. Whereas unselfish people say, well, I know how the other person feels because I know what it's to be like in their shoes. And so I'm going to be cognizant of that as I go do things in life. I'm going to try and make the world better for me and them because I realize that really you are me. If you're not doing well, then really I'm not doing well. And if you're doing well, then I am doing well. So we are connected in that way. And pretty much the only group in America who thought this way all along are the Native Americans.
Yeah, the Native Americans was pretty good about spiritualism, at least until the white man showed up.
Yeah, and ruined everything with our selfishness and owning the land. But, so the reason why I want to discuss all of this is because, you know, I could just mention, well, there's going to be a pole shift. The crust is going to come free from the core. It's going to shift. The core is never going to change. It's still turning. Its north pole still points up. And then the crust is going to come loose, be moved upward and over the North Pole so that the eastern tip of Brazil is the new North Pole. And then Planet X will let go of it with a magnetic field. That'll be a magnetic grip. And then keep on going, and that will be where the new North Pole is for, you know, from then on. So that would, you know, just be a natural event. But the thing is what's happening now is far beyond that because extraterrestrials from all over the universe have heard about Earth, and they're all here to watch this. And this is a graduation. Within 100 years of Poleshift, we are going to graduate to the fourth dimension. And at that level, we're all going to be telepathic. When we're born, we're going to live 400 years. Every single person will be kind. There won't be any governments. There won't be any religions. There won't be any economies. And there will be open contact with unselfish extraterrestrials from all over the universe. So this is not just a simple show about a disaster, but really the point is, even if you only live 5 more minutes, make sure it's helping somebody else. Because as my wife says, the bus is running. Are you going to be on it? This is a graduation, and everyone can make their own choices whether they're ready to graduate to the next level up or not. And I can tell you, about a third of the Earth, a little bit more than that, have achieved that consciousness. They don't need to go through the tribulation. And in Revelation it says there were 2 in the garden, 2 in the field, and 1 disappeared. 1 was taken. And in the kitchen there were 2 and 1 was taken. And what that's referring to is that people think that the extraterrestrials are just going to come and take the unselfish people away before the tribulation because they've already learned their lesson. They have already been selected as they're having their names written in the book of life. And they don't need to go through this. Now, it's up to the extraterrestrials whether anybody gets beamed up before, during, or after Poleshift. And they're not saying what they plan to do. So it would be foolish, being that the Earth is our planet and this is our problem, it would be foolish to assume that you don't have to do anything and you're just going to be saved, because that isn't the truth. But there's a lot to be admired about people on Earth who have conquered all of this adversity, and all of these selfish people with their constant plots and schemes conquered all of that and survived it and actually flourished. And in the future, in the next 1,000 years, with the help of extraterrestrials, we're going to build a huge fleet of spaceships, and we're going to travel the entire universe, the unselfish humans from Earth, and we're going to be known from one end of the universe to the other as the great explorer race, to whom nothing is an unsolvable problem.
Well, that sounds kind of, like wishful thinking, given the fact we can't solve any of our problems now. But, there's a lot to be said for maturity. I was going to mention, though, Gordon, that I see it's 3 minutes till 9, so we've been on here almost an hour. I was going to say, would you like to take a break for about 3 or 4 minutes and come back and take up where we left off at?
Oh, I'd love to. Love to.
All righty. Well, I got some break time music here. Let me start that to playing, and we'll come back here before that music's over.
Okay, great.
Okay, doke. Okay, everybody, we are now back live on the air. Gordon, are you back with me?
I certainly am, Royce.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure, because the break time music had just ended, and I've got to tell you, I timed it out just perfectly. And I see everybody's still with us in the chat room. So we was going right back to where we were at. You were mentioning about these humans being able to solve any of their problems, and I made the comment about that's, kind of unbelievable given our track history now. So I take it there's going to be a major elevation in human consciousness?
Yes, there is, but I am saying that even with all of the evil and all the forces against unselfish people, the unselfish people have survived and flourished. And if you could take all the selfish people away, then you wouldn't really need a government. The whole idea of controlling people is because of the selfish people trying to ruin everything. So if the unselfish people didn't come up with rules to try and rein in these selfish people, we'd really be lost. I mean, so once you get rid of them all, and they're not allowed to be reborn on the earth is going to be a great place anyway, even without considering unselfish extraterrestrials having open contact with us. So the extraterrestrials haven't said how they would help rebuild the earth or what they would do. They've been pretty closed-mouthed about that. But clearly, if they're going to be living here too, then they're obviously going to take a great interest in the outcome of the earth and what goes on. But my wife reminded me that I started talking about George Noory, and I wanted to get back to that because my father had gone to a place that I don't think it exists anymore, but it was in Beverly Hills in the 60s, and probably maybe even 1957, I think my father went. And they measured intelligence using brainwaves and then how much of it you used. So my father was measured to be in the top 0.25% in the world of intelligence, and he was already using 90% of it. And that accounted for his international success because he had his company in Mexico City, Munich, London, Paris, Tokyo, and New York. And he ended up speaking 7 languages. And before he died in 1988, he was a consultant to the government of Red China and Russia on international marketing. So this was a guy who had a broad knowledge of the public and an appeal to the public. So he was telling me about that. And I thought, well, I was at the University of Virginia studying aerospace engineering, and it was the war in Vietnam, and I had started by seeing a huge mothership, a mile in diameter, with my mother and brother over San Juan Harbor in 1964. It sort of winked in, sort of materialized right there in front of us in the night sky, and it was like the top half of a grapefruit, circular on the bottom and hemispherical on the top. And it was as if it was made of white milk glass with an orange light bulb in the center, and there was really no detail on the surface. And then a door opened that you didn't know was there until it opened. It opened, and 3 flying saucers came flying out the side of it and headed east out over the Atlantic and disappeared. Then the door closed. It moved slightly, probably about 5 to 10 degrees in the sky, and then it winked out just like somebody had a dimmer switch on it. So I was like, oh my God, look at this extraterrestrial technology. And my mother and brother go, well, that's interesting, but what's for dinner? And I go, the hell with dinner. God, do you realize what we just saw? So I'm sitting there at the University of Virginia thinking, if I get really good at this, the government's going to have me building missiles, and the missiles are going to be killing somebody. And I had read Edgar Cayce, and he said the scientists are responsible for the karma of the weapons they create. And I thought, well, this is a joke, going to school to learn to build missiles and rocket systems when the extraterrestrials already have an incredible technology. I'm wasting my time. And if I do stay in it, I'm going to be killing people. So I dropped out. And I began thinking about it more and more and more. And I thought, what I want to do is I'm still interested in space. I'm still interested in extraterrestrials. Why don't I try and contact them? But I really had no way to do that. So then my father was talking about this place in Beverly Hills, so I went out there, and it was these two women, Dr. Viola Pettit-Neal and this other woman, Dr. Shafika Karagula, who turns out is George Noory's aunt. And George Noory never met her. But they had this Biometric Research Institute, and I thought, well, you know, if I'm interested in something, I get an A. But if I'm not interested, I'm lucky if I get a C or a D. How could I learn to concentrate? And then no matter what I want to do, no matter how interesting it is, I can always succeed in it. So I went out there, and I was also measured to be in the top 0.25% of the world in intelligence, and I was using less than a moron would use if a moron was using all of it. So I was like, gosh. So she taught me this concentration exercise, which I'm about to tell you, which is you visualize a perfect circle in your mind clockwise. You start at the top center, and you go around in the circle, and you come back to the top center. Now you've got a perfect circle hanging in the air in your mind, and you can visualize it as a flashlight at night, making this circle of light, or you can imagine it as a pencil on a piece of paper, or you could lie on your back in bed and look at the ceiling and imagine that you're drawing it on the ceiling. However you want to do it. But the point is, when you try and concentrate, as soon as you start doing that, you start thinking, oh, I got to call my mother. And then you're not concentrating. So the thing is to keep your mind going back to that. You put your index finger on your other hand on the palm, and you draw a perfect circle. And then you put a dot in the exact center. Then you erase that image, and then you draw it again. So you go circle, dot, erase. Circle, dot, erase. And of course, as you're doing it, you think, oh, I got to wake up early tomorrow for my meeting or whatever. You know, the point is you're not concentrating. That's why you need this exercise. So you do this for 20 minutes a day for 100 days, and you will notice a change in your life, the likes of which you've never experienced before. And so that's what I did. And this brought me to a point where you've got all these thoughts in your mind, and then you're eliminating all of them except one. And I thought, well, what if you remain conscious and you eliminate even that last thought? So what happens is, let's use this analogy. Your higher mind is the sky, and your lower mind is a little pond. And when there's no wind, the pond is like a mirror, and it reflects the sky. But when the wind is blowing and makes the surface of the pond choppy, it breaks up the reflection of the sky so that you don't know really what the higher image is. So, in a sense, in order to put yourself in touch with your higher self, you need to first learn to concentrate, and then, remaining conscious, eliminate even the last thought that's in your lower mind, and open up your lower mind to be a perfect reflection of your higher mind. So I couldn't afford to go back to Beverly Hills. This was in 1970 in 100 days. So I didn't get back there for a year. And I did this exercise every single day. And by doing it, I learned that I could control my heart rate, my respiration, my health, when I wanted to go to sleep, when I wanted to wake up. It was just amazing, all the effects throughout my everyday life. And I was able also to focus on other people. So when I wanted to tune in to somebody else, it was like I could eliminate all the distractions and just tune myself to their frequency. So this is a gift that I'm giving your listeners, because this woman's not in business anymore. This information's not taught anymore, and it's not available. And I'm giving it as a gift because I want everyone to try it. And Royce, I've told this to over 1,000 people, and I've said it on several huge radio shows, and I doubt that even one person has tried it. But if one person would try it, it would change their lives. So as a result of that, I decided, well, I'm going to contact extraterrestrials. So I would go outside and I would focus on the one thought, because I said, well, I don't know if I can hear them, but I'm pretty sure they can hear me, and I'm going to ask for contact. So every clear night, I would go outside and look up at the stars, and I would say, I want contact with unselfish extraterrestrials. because I always believed that it was the same up there as it is down here. There's the good, the bad, and the ugly, and why the hell would you want to contact the bad and the ugly?
Yeah, I've always agreed with you on that, Gordon, that, if we got anything from good to bad to everything in between here, why would outer space be any different?
Exactly. So, anyway, 20 years went by, and amazingly enough, on December 7th of 1988, I had my ex-girlfriend from hell, who I have nothing to do with anymore, driving, and we were headed to Bangor, Maine at 7 o'clock at night, and all of a sudden a meteor streaked in, and as it was streaking in, I heard a clear voice in my head, "We're on a saucer, and we're coming to take you on board." And I turned and I told that to her, and she looked at me like, "Oh, you poor baby, now you really have brain damage." And this meteor just went from like 18,000 miles an hour streaking in from the west to all of a sudden it was 100 feet above our car. And this is in Maine, and we're going up and down hills, and there's a speed limit of about 50, 60 miles an hour. And it's staying about 100 feet above the car. And finally we got north, and it was blocking the road. I grabbed the steering wheel, steered the car off the road, put my foot on the brake, stopped the car, and turned the ignition key off, and grabbed the key, and jumped out of the car, and went running over to the ship, and said, "Beam me up," which, that's, kind of funny, but anyway, I'm looking at this thing, and it's a 150-foot black disc with a flashing red, white, and blue light in the top center and the bottom center, and I was looking at that going, "Oh, our national colors, that's interesting." And then pressed into the sides of the bottom were two 100-foot by 30-foot diameter sausages that were like pontoons. So it looked to me like this is a 150-foot disc with twin pontoons on the bottom side that look like cylinders. They look like gelatin capsules, 100 feet long and 30 feet in diameter. And at the end of each pontoon was a big white headlight, just like you see on the front of a freight train. And I'm standing underneath it, 100 feet underneath it, and my ex-girlfriend from hell was over at this house next door, banging on the door, "Help, help, there's UFOs, help, help." And all of a sudden the bottom of the saucer opened up, and this green light, this faint green light, came down and picked her right up off the porch of this house, picked me up physically, and we lifted right up in the air about 100 feet, and we got inside it, and the bottom closed, and I look at my girlfriend, and she's standing there asleep, and I'm wide awake. And this door opens, and out comes this guy from the Pleiades to talk to me. And that's when I discovered that I'm reincarnated from the Pleiades, that I was a Pleiadian before I came to Earth, and that I came out here about 25,000 years ago. This guy could walk down any street on Earth, and you would never know he was from another planet. He was completely like any other Scandinavian guy you would ever see anywhere.
Okay, Gordon, real quick, Les Schwartz is in the chat room. He was asking if you were saying that the ETs took 17 years to respond to your requests.
I'm saying they took 20 years before I actually was consciously taken on board. Physically.
So
now,
they're maybe kind of leery of you at first, or they watch you for a while before they actually respond?
No, I actually learned that, see, when I was 5 years old, my mother put me in the bedroom. It was the summer. It was warm. It was a nice summer day, and to take a nap, and she went into her bedroom. And as soon as I lay down in the bed, some people came. I don't know how they did it. They came right through the wall. They were regular people, and they were taking me to an important meeting on another planet. And when they took me, and now remember, I'm a 5-year-old child taking a nap in my mother's house. They took me to another planet for 3 days, and at this meeting, I was an adult, and I was a member of this council, and we were discussing something really important, but I was an adult. And then they brought me back, and I came back about an hour later, 3 hours later, and I woke up, and I went running into my mother's room, and I said, "You're not going to believe what happened. Some people came and took me somewhere for 3 days." And my mother goes, well, that's impossible, dear. That was just a dream. And I'm like, no, it's not a dream. It really happened. And she's like, yeah, that's what you think, but that's impossible. It's just a dream. And I was like, wow, you know, because I know what happened to me. I mean, I'm not a stupid person, Royce. And when I say I saw something or did something, I'm saying I saw or did it. And I know what I did, and I'm not making this stuff up. I know the difference between dreams, fantasy, visions, reality, the whole thing. So I realized right then we weren't going to get anywhere. But then as we were growing up in the woods, now you got to realize I grew up in western Connecticut where it was 7 miles to the nearest street light or any of that. And my mother, brother, and I each had our own separate bedroom, and we'd wake up simultaneously, and it was as if the house was in the center of Yankee Stadium in New York with the floodlights on. The whole house, it was like a white light outside the house, and we were all simultaneously awake, and we'd jump out of bed, run downstairs, run out the front door, and look around, and as soon as we opened up the front door and went outside, it was dark outside. And we're like, what in the hell was that? This kept happening our whole childhood. So what I'm saying is that I've always been in touch with extraterrestrials, and the reason why is because I came here as part of this mission. I told my mother, I said, you know, when I was 20, I said, you know, I think I came to bring light and love. And she goes, well, you're not the son I thought I was having. Why can't you be more like your brother? So,
right.
You know, but so the thing is all I'm saying is that this is the first time that, although I may very well have been on saucers all of my life, but only when I was asleep, only out of body. But this is the first time that I was physically taken on board a ship while I was awake in my body, and I spent 3.5 hours talking to this person from the Pleiades.
Right. Now, James is in the chat room. He was saying that the light that he's seen is blue, and it's a cylinder of about 8 inches in diameter. He's asked, is that the beam that you saw, except it was green?
No, it was just like a spotlight, but it was a light, faint green color, and the center, the floor, the bottom of this disc, not the pontoons, but the disc, opened up, and this faint greenish glow came down and just picked us right up off the floor. Off the ground. So I don't really know what they mean by this beam that they may have experienced, but this was just it came out of like a 10 or 12 foot diameter hole in the floor of the ship, and by the time it reached the ground, it was at least 150 feet wide, because she was banging on the door of this house to get in, and nobody was answering. And I was standing directly underneath, looking up into this hole at the bottom of the ship, saying, beam me up. So, you know.
Right.
But the point is, from the moment I read Edgar Cayce in 1968 about the prophecy of Poleshift, I go, that's absolutely true. And I had read Velikovsky's Worlds in Collision. Then when Zecharia Sitchin's books started coming out about Planet X and Nibiru in 1974, I read those, and then I bought every single one and read them all. And so I was always very familiar with this. But from the moment that I heard about Poleshift, I knew it was true. And then in 1973, I had a vision of it where I lived through it. And that, I was just drained. I woke up in the morning like I had spent 6 months living through Poleshift and the aftertime. And then in 1988, before this saucer incident, I had a waking vision sitting on my living room couch in my house in Maine. I had a waking vision of Poleshift, only what was different was in 1973, it involved a world war had also happened. But in the vision in 1988, there was no world war, but I also saw the sky filled from one end to the other with ships from extraterrestrial civilizations. So I realized there would be open contact with ETs. They were going to come. And now logically I understand, once the government collapses, that's what's going to happen. There's going to be open contact. But then the unselfish ETs are never going to make themselves visible or contact selfish people. So selfish people are going to think this is an awful disaster. Maybe I should kill all my neighbors and eat them. Maybe I should steal all their food and their weapons. And maybe I should just go on an orgy of death and sex, you know. And meanwhile, the unselfish people are going to be trying to help one another. So, you know, and they'll be seeing that there's unselfish ETs. So the important thing is for people to form survival communities where there's not one single selfish member, because there's a good chance that the effects will be such that the grid will go down totally, and there won't be any more communications, TV. All the satellites will be ripped out of Earth, because not only is Planet X going to magnetically grab the Great Atlantic Rift, which is a huge equivalent of a bar of steel on the surface of the crust of the Earth, is in the center of the Atlantic from Iceland down to Antarctica is a giant crack, and iron ore or iron magma keeps welling up, and the magnetic field of Planet X is 23 times the magnetic field of Earth. So as the Earth turns, with the North Pole of Planet X pointed at the Earth, it's like every time the Atlantic Rift comes around, it grabs it, and there's a little bit of a shudder, but then the Earth keeps turning. But as Planet X comes closer, it's going to actually grab the crust and stop it, and there's going to be this awful, awful sound of the crust coming free of the core. The core will continue to turn. The North Pole of the core will continue to be upward, but the crust will be held by the magnetic field of Planet X. And then as Planet X goes from below the Earth to above the Earth without colliding, it will grab the whole crust and slide it up over the North Pole. And as Recife, Brazil reaches the North Pole, it will let go and keep on going, and that will be our new North Pole. So
okay.
Those are the physical things that are going to be happening.
Well, also now, because we got about 40 minutes left, and I don't want you to run out of time. Well, I don't know how much time you need, but ain't there some preparations we need to be making?
Well, exactly. And
I wasn't trying to rush you. I was just trying to think maybe we ought to shift to the preparations. Because we can always come back to the other, you know what I'm saying?
Well, yes. And Royce, you can have me on again.
Right. We discussed that earlier, and I'll be looking forward to that, and I'll be letting everybody know about it. But, let's go ahead, and because I'm kind of curious what preparations you're going to recommend.
Okay. So the elite and the wealthy and the powerful have known about this for years. Their initial plan was to have huge underground bases, which is why Denver Airport's all excavated, and that they've been moving the U.S. government. You know, people say, well, isn't Washington good enough? What's wrong with Washington? Why move the CIA, NASA, the IRS, and every other branch of government out to Denver? And that's because they're not announcing Poleshift, but they're making plans for it. And the plans don't include you. A year ago, the government ordered $1 billion worth of freeze-dried food. And I thought, well, isn't that wonderful, you know, the government. And then I was lecturing at a UFO conference in Albuquerque, New Mexico a year ago, and yesterday, a year ago. And there was a woman there who lives near the secret underground base in Kokomo, Indiana, and she said that the tractor trailers loaded with freeze-dried food were lined up right to the horizon, all being put in the underground bases for the government. So, you know, in the old English feudal system, you had the king, and then you had all these dukes and duchesses and earls and princes. So in the modern system, what you have is our selfish leaders, and then you have below them is all these government officials who all are like minor princes and royalty, just like a feudal system. So they're expecting that when Poleshift happens, that they're still going to have health insurance, they're still going to have food, everything's going to, they'll still get a pension, and they're all wrong, all of them. Now, the elite and the super wealthy, their first plan was bunkers, but when the world is swept by 9 and 10 magnitude Richter earthquakes, all those bunkers are going to collapse, the entrances are going to be blocked and sealed, and everybody's going to die. So then their second plan was, because they're in contact with selfish extraterrestrials who lie like a rug, they said, well, oh, don't worry, we'll bring you to Mars and the moon, and after all the dust settles, you can come back and be kings of the earth. But then they discovered that they were lying, and there were no plans to move them to the moon and Mars, and if they went to the moon and Mars, they'd never be able to come back anyway. So then their next plan was to have a giant space station where all the elite could live. But then they realized that after Planet X comes close enough to grab the crust and separate it and then reattach it and keep on going, the tail of Planet X, 5 million miles of rocks and gravel, boulders, and iron oxide dust, and sort of an oily hydrocarbon, are going to hit the Earth with a rain of meteors, the likes of which has never been seen in recent times. But it happens every time there's Poleshift. And that's going to be things coming from the sky smashing everything. Well, the first thing that's going to do is take out the space station. And the astronauts all know this. And they should all be getting the Medals of Honor right now because they're on a suicide mission. They don't know up on that space station whether the next rock coming through is going to take it out. And you got to remember, a rock the size of a speck of dust could take out the space station. Because if it's doing 18,000 miles an hour, all it's got to do is put a hole in it, and that's that. So they don't really have a place to go. So now they're realizing, well, damn, we're going to be stuck here on Earth like everybody else. But if all governments fail, if all economies fail, if all religions fail, if all bridges are out, if all roads are cracked up and useless, and there's no more fuel, and there's no more manufacturing, and all the stores have been looted and are empty, and there's nobody else, the only thing anybody's going to have is if they know how to work with their hands, which is why the key right now is for you to get as far away from the coasts as at greatest elevation you can find, and to find like-minded, unselfish people with whom you can live in the equivalent of the year 1825, technologically speaking. So you've heard of the Amish and the Shakers. It's that kind of a living where you don't have electricity and you make everything. You make your clothes, you make your fabric, you grow your food, you make your own shoes, because you can't put away 40 years worth of underwear and socks. You can't put away 40 years worth of food. You can't put away 40 years worth of bullets. You can't put away any of this stuff. And if you do, somebody with a gun is going to come and take it from you. So everyone should be watching these shows on TV, like the survival shows where two guys are dropped off in the wilderness, or one guy and he's got to figure out what he can eat and how he can get back to civilization. You've got to be buying books on edible plants. You have to, if you live in a city, move. If you live in the country, start saving seeds. Learn how to grow things. If you live in a safe location, which Zeta Talk has a whole section on safe locations. You can go there and enter where you live, look it up, and see what's going to happen where you live. But people don't realize that as the Earth spins, all the water of the oceans accumulates at the equator. The reason why I say you don't realize it is because if you're in a ship and you sail around the world, it just seems the water's the same height everywhere you go. And it never really occurs to you. But you can see that as the Earth spins, of course the water would go to the outermost section, which would be the equator. So actually, the water is a lot deeper. If the Earth weren't turning, the water at the equator is very much deeper than it would be otherwise. So you've got the water accumulating at the equator. Now along comes Planet X and it grabs the crust and stops it from turning. And the core keeps turning, but the crust stops. So now all the water that's at the equator heads back for the North and the South Pole. But then the whole crust gets shifted and now there's a new North and South Pole. So now the water heads back to the new equator. So what's going to happen at the moment of Poleshift, which the whole Poleshift will take 1 hour. That's all. What's going to happen is that there's going to be a 600-foot tidal surge, not a wave. It's not going to be like that movie Deep Impact or 2012 where you have a wave breaking that's 4 miles high. This is going to be just like the Japanese tsunami. The water comes in, but it doesn't stop coming in. And in Japan, that was 33 feet. Can you imagine what a 600-foot tidal surge is going to do around the world?
I don't think I want to imagine.
Right. And so, in a fjord, it's actually going to channel the water. So at the head of the fjord, it's probably going to go up to maybe 2,000 feet high. And even in a place like Texas, where there's a series of ridges that would funnel a tidal wave coming out of the Gulf of Mexico, the water is actually going to be about 875 feet high. Then you've got places like the United Kingdom and Florida, which are going to sink an additional 150 feet. So their tidal wave is going to be the equivalent of 750 feet. So if you're listening from Florida, run for your life. If you're listening from England or the UK, it doesn't matter. Scotland, Ireland, Wales, Britain, run for your life. So all the leaders of the world know this, and they're not discussing it in emails. They're not discussing it in telephone calls. What they're doing is they're having face-to-face meetings. So right now I'll discuss what's about to happen with these earth changes. First of all, the Pacific is going to narrow and the Atlantic is going to widen. That's one thing. The second thing is that the southeastern Asia is like a ribbon, and if you hold one end of a ribbon on the table with your finger, and you put your other hand, a finger from your other hand on the other end of the ribbon, and you move your fingers together, you'll see the ribbon will make these ripples. Well, that's what's happening right now with Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, coastal Thailand, and coastal China, and coastal Vietnam, is that they're having a submergence. So parts of Jakarta, Indonesia are 80 feet lower just in the last year. And I'm not talking a flood from a rain. I'm talking salt water, 80 feet deeper. And the Indonesian government is still not telling its people that it's about to sink from Poleshift. So when Obama went over there, and Obama knows all about this, and if he mentioned it, he wouldn't be down for breakfast the next morning. So he's owned just like every other president has been owned. So you've got he went over to Indonesia and they said, well, would you take all the Indonesians in the United States? And he said, no, you got to be kidding. But I'll leave one warship there to move Indonesian people to other countries if they will accept them. But the thing is, Royce, is there isn't one single country on the earth that has agreed to take any other population from any other country. So the United States government's been telling people, yeah, there'll be a few earthquakes, nothing to worry about, things will be normal. But the developed nations all know the complete truth. And Cameron, who's the Prime Minister of the UK, has been begging the Scandinavian people to take the British people in the United Kingdom as immigrants, and they've refused. There's going to be flooding. All the Baltic lowlands are going to be flooded. So the thing is, and all of Europe, right up to the mountains of Switzerland, is going to be flooded. So, excuse me, that's why, you see all these things that seem unrelated, but that's why NATO invaded Libya. Egypt is going to be underwater. So when all the European elite want a safe place to go, the closest place for them is North Africa. But they aren't going to choose Egypt because Egypt's going to be underwater. They're not going to choose Algeria and Morocco because there are mountain tribes there, just like trying to control Afghanistan. You're just never going to do it. That's why they focused on Gaddafi. Now, if you know anything about history, Gaddafi was the most pro-Western leader in Africa. Every single Libyan person had a college education. They got a free gift from the government of like $50,000 to buy their first house. The women could go to school, be educated, could drive. They bought all Western things and admired all Western things. And then all of a sudden NATO comes in and blows the hell out of it and kills Gaddafi. Why? Because if you land in Libya, you go inland, you get to mountains with no evil native tribes, and a huge water aquifer and sweet oil that could be used to continue as before, which, as I just said before, nobody's going to be continuing as before, but they can always fool themselves. So that's what's been going on in Libya. Now, new land is going to arise in the South Atlantic in between Africa and South America, and that's why the British government has just decided to send a whole new contingent of troops to the Falkland Islands, because when that new land arises at Poleshift, they want to jump on it and claim it for Britain and for the English government. And then you have Australia and New Zealand. As the Pacific gets narrower, the Pacific Plate is going to pile under New Zealand, lifting it, and it's going to lift the eastern edge of Australia, which is why they've had a lot of flooding there, because the rivers drain and then they go out to sea. But because the eastern edge of Australia is rising in altitude, the rivers have to pool the water before the water gets high enough to drain, because Australia is tipped with the eastern end of it higher than the western end. And in fact, the whole western edge of Australia is going to go underwater. Japan is going to be shattered from north to south. Imagine that you put some pebbles on the table, you put your grandmother's best china dinner plate on the pebbles, and then you took a hammer and you shatter your grandmother's dinner plate. The pieces are going to fall between the pebbles. So Japan's going to be shattered, and parts of it are going to be still sticking up as a series of islands, but the majority of it's going to be underwater. Within hours of Japan shattering, the New Madrid Fault is going to go off. Now, that's a huge downwarping of the Mississippi and Ohio valleys, where there was a giant earthquake in 1811. And when that happens, that's going to create a giant downwarping that's going to let salt water go from the Gulf of Mexico all the way up to the Great Lakes. At the same time, the St. Lawrence Seaway is going to rip wider. So the whole eastern United States, what's left of it, the mountains, are going to be just like New Zealand is to Australia. You're going to have a continental island that's separate with salt water all around it, and then you're going to have the Great Lakes be salt. The Mississippi Valley will be 200 miles wide, and in California, the surge of salt water is going to come in, and it's going to fill all the food-producing valleys, like the Salton Sea, up around Sacramento, Napa Valley, all those, complete salt water. So we're talking about the loss of all food production. But it wouldn't matter if they were still producing food, because it would never get to you. The only food you're going to have is food you grow yourself or you can trade for. So if you're good at making looms, you can trade it to some people that have some animals and are making fiber, and they can make some cloth, and they can trade it back for you. So whatever it is you can do that using your hands, that's what's going to be valuable. Not gold, not silver, because if you're starving and and you have gold in your pocket and you meet somebody else that has a little bit of food, why would they trade their food for gold? They're just not. So, there's a lot of people saying, well, there's going to be an economic collapse. Well, yes, there is. And that's the greatest blessing of all, because we won't have a cataclysm. We'll just have people, and we already have people who say, I've been thinking in the last 6 months, the last year, the last 5 years, I've been realizing maybe everything I've worked for my entire life is not a worthy goal. So all of a sudden people are asking themselves, what's really important? And if the economy collapses and every single person is without work and there is no food, then it's a great warm-up to Poleshift, because people are going to realize, wow, the only thing I'm going to have is stuff I make for myself. And that means growing your own food, making tools, whatever it is. Maybe you're good at making bows and arrows, but whatever it is, that will be something you can trade. Now, people don't realize that all the salt in the United States comes from underneath Ohio. Ohio was the center of an inland sea that dried up. So there's a layer of salt that goes under Ohio, and that's where all the salt mines are. That's where Morton gets its salt and everybody else. And that's going to be underwater. Ohio is going to be underwater. So without electricity, without refrigeration, how are you going to preserve food? It won't be possible unless you have salt. But salt water, Edgar Cayce said that in his next lifetime, 100 years after Poleshift, he would be born in one of the world's greatest seaports in the world, Omaha, Nebraska. So the whole Mississippi Valley, all the way into the states where you wouldn't even think it was possible, are going to be salt water. And I don't know if you heard the news, Royce, but Dick Cheney tried to get the Wyoming legislature to buy a used aircraft carrier. Did you hear about that?
No, I didn't.
Well, what in the hell would the state of Wyoming do with a used aircraft carrier?
I have no clue.
It's pretty funny, really, isn't it? But it isn't funny, because after Poleshift, salt water is going to be going up the Red River, or whatever the hell its name is, into Wyoming, and they could actually park a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier there, and they could hold 5,000 elite with a nuclear-powered generators with hospital, with food supplies, and their own deck with airplanes to go bomb other people. So these little unconnected facts that are out there are really all talking about the same thing. Everybody's getting ready for Poleshift except you and me, because we're expendable. They're not telling us because they don't want us to know. Now, we've always known that the evil groups were, number one, the military-industrial complex, because they blow people up, then they charge you to rebuild everything, then they charge you for more bombs and armaments, and then they blow everything up again. So you've never been important to the military-industrial complex, and they've owned every single president. And then their allies, the bankers, they're the people that finance the weapons. They're the people that finance the destruction. They finance the rebuilding. They finance more weapons. So they were like hand in hand until recently, when the Rothschilds realized, wow, the only way we're going to survive is if there's an economy, and the only way there's going to be an economy after Poleshift is if there's survival communities. So, and this you might find hard to believe, the bankers have split with the military-industrial complex. So the Rothschilds spoke to Rupert Murdoch and said, look, would you be willing to start preparing people for Poleshift? And Rupert Murdoch agreed that he would. So I know there's a lot of people say, oh, you should never watch Fox News, you should only watch CNN, blah, blah, blah. But if you watch, when Glenn Beck was on Fox News, all of his advertisers were like water filters, saving seeds, gear that you could take and go. And, you know, you probably heard that Oprah Winfrey has these shows where she gives everybody in the audience a new car or a trip to Australia, right?
I'll take one. But yeah, I haven't heard about that. But yeah, maybe wish I was on her show.
Yeah. So at Christmas, the last Christmas when Glenn Beck was on before he formed his own TV network, he gave every single person in his audience a red backpack, which had everything you would need if you have to run for your life. You could live for a week out of this backpack that he gave you. So that's what I'm talking about. As hard as some people are going to find it to believe, you really should be watching Fox News. So anyway, all the presidents have been owned by the selfish elite, and they can't say what's really going on. So I'm waiting for the president to grow a set of balls and say, this is what we're going to do. But the Chinese government is the only government in the world that has done anything for its people. And what they've done is they've picked the least earthquake-prone areas, and they have built giant empty cities called ghost cities. And you can look this up online, the ghost cities of China. They built giant cities, apartment buildings, industrial areas, highways, water systems, sewer systems, parks, schools, colleges, everything. And it's all sitting there empty. And when the coast of China starts sinking, they're going to move all their people inland to these brand new cities. And what has the U.S. government done? It continues to burrow under Denver Airport so that the elite and the military can institute martial law at Poleshift, which thankfully will be limited to Colorado and the area right around Colorado. And then, the leaders are going to find that their troops don't really want to be their troops for the rest of their lives after Poleshift. So the troops are going to turn on the leaders, and that's when the government will end, and there will never be another government. So a lot of these issues that people debate every day about the election, about the Constitution, look, I'm in favor of the Constitution, and I love the United States, but all of this is about to be moot. Within a year, there isn't going to be any government. So there's going to be some big changes. And the thing is, to do this, you need a big broom, and Planet X is exactly that. Now, it was first spotted in 1983. It came into the solar system in 99. It came and approached the sun from behind the sun in up till 2003. And around 2003, it came around the front of the sun. So now it's on our side of the sun, below the sun. So it's right below the sun. So if you look at the sun, you can't see it. But at sunrise or sunset, if you put a red filter, like you can go to a camera store and buy what's called an R25 filter. You need two of them, two R25 filters. You focus the digital camera, put the red filter in front of the lens, and take a picture of the sun every morning at sunrise and every night at sunset on the clear days. You'll see this huge glowing area beneath the sun. And this is for all the world to see starting in February. And I've taken a lot of pictures of it myself. There's a guy in Italy who's done that. And getting back to Zeta Talk, if you would like to ask the extraterrestrials something yourself, there's a website called http://poleshift.ning.com. And that's where you go. You can just read it. You don't need to join. But if you want to ask a question of the Zetas, you have to join. And they're very strict. You can't ask a question that's been asked before. So that requires you to go to Zeta Talk, and they have their own internal Google search engine, and you can see if your question has been asked before. And if it hasn't, then go ahead and ask it. And then Nancy Leader is on that Poleshift Ning. She'll accept the question or not accept it. And if she accepts it, then that means that Friday of that week, she will ask the Zetas. She will write out a newsletter. She'll write the answers to the Ning, poleshift.ning.com on Saturday. On Sunday, she sends out her free newsletter, and then the next week, she puts all of that information into zetatalk.com. So zetatalk.com is always updated, and the poleshift.ning is where the current questions and issues, and there's a lot of pictures there of the Planet X complex beneath the sun. Now, you can't see Planet X, but you can see its 5 million mile long tail of rocks and dust backlit by the sun, and it appears as this giant glowing area. So this is not something 18 times the size of Jupiter that might come in the future and disturb all the planets. It's already here. Now, if you could stand on a desk and reach up and grab the whole solar system and slam it down onto the desk, you would see that the north pole of every single planet and the sun all face upward. So I'm not talking about a magnetic pole shift. I'm not talking about the north pole of the Earth moving. I'm saying the core will keep turning unchanged with its north pole pointing up. But if you look at the planets, they go around the sun counterclockwise. So all of a sudden, in comes Planet X going clockwise. Now, this is going to be a shock to some of your listeners, but I consider myself to be the discoverer of this, and I'd like to get some credit for it, but it's pretty hard. Anyway, one of the greatest lies you've ever been told all your life is that gravity pulls. And I'm telling you right now, gravity does not pull. It pushes. And what got me started in that was I was looking at flying saucers, because by now I've seen over 36 of them, and I was thinking, how are they doing what I'm seeing them do? And people talk about anti-gravity, and then I thought, well, let me look at the electromagnetic spectrum. So you start with heat, then you go to you go to sound, you go to light, you go to electricity, you go to radio waves, you go to magnetism, and then you go to gravity. And that's called the electromagnetic spectrum. So let's start at the beginning. You have heat. Heat goes out and it doesn't come back. Yes, you can reflect it back, but it only goes out. It doesn't go in. So then you go to sound. Sound goes out and it doesn't come back. You can reflect it back. You can manipulate it in various ways, but it goes out and it doesn't come back. Light goes out and doesn't come back. So have you ever heard of anti-heat? Have you ever heard of anti-sound? Have you ever heard of anti-light? And then you go to radio waves. Radio waves go out, but they don't come back. They can be reflected back. So have you ever heard of anti-radio waves? So you get to magnetic. Well, people say magnetism is polar because it has a north pole and a south pole. But if you look at it, it's really only coming out from the North Pole. It's just that whatever it is, it's almost like there's a special opening on the South Pole where the only thing that can get in is magnetrons from the North Pole. So it isn't like it's sucking magnetic force into the South Pole. It's like maybe there's a sort of a magnetic vacuum there, and if any magnetrons get in the neighborhood, they get sucked in, but not sucked in to stop, but to go right through the magnet and come out the North Pole again. So once again, even though people normally think of magnets as being polar, you can really think of it as being an outgoing force with no ingoing force. And then all of a sudden you get to gravity. Now, when Newton saw the apple fall and he said gravity pushes. So in 1988, I found out who the greatest gravity researcher in the world is, and he's Dr. Ephraim Fishback in Purdue University, and I called him up and I said, I've been studying and I hear people say anti-gravity, and I don't think there's any such thing as anti-gravity. I think there's gravity and more gravity, and I think gravity pushes. Is there any proof that gravity pushes or pulls? And he goes, Gordon, that's the most interesting scientific question at the present time on Earth. There is no proof that gravity pulls or pushes. If you could invent an experiment that would prove whether gravity pushes or pulls, you would probably be one of the most famous scientists in the last thousands of years. And so what I'm trying to tell you is that because gravity pushes, there's no way that Planet X is going to hit the Earth. There's no way it's going to hit the sun. There's no way that Venus is going to hit the Earth or the dark twin of the Earth is ever they're all going to collide. Instead, what you have is Venus, the dark twin of Earth, and Earth are trying to go counterclockwise. Planet X is trying to go clockwise, and Planet X is the bigger of the four. And it has a particle flow that is creating a cup that's holding Venus, the dark twin of Earth, and Earth motionless in front of the sun. So believe it or not, the Earth has not been in orbit around the sun since 2003. And in fact, there is a planet on the other side of the sun that nobody's ever seen. NASA must have discovered it the very first satellite they set up. They never said a word. And it is caught up to the Earth, and it's the same size as Earth, has no atmosphere, no ocean, no life, and it's a dark cinder, and it reflects a faint bluish light, sometimes yellow too. And it was on the other side of the sun, and when the Earth stopped in its orbit, the dark twin of the Earth caught up to the Earth. Now, the only people in all the literature in the entire world, including all the astronomers and all the science literature, the only people who brought it up are the Zetas in Zeta Talk. And now, if you go to the Neumeier station, which is the German Antarctic base, they have a webcam, and they play the 24-hour image of the sky above the Neumeier station. You can plainly see the moon go by, then the dark twin of the Earth go by, then the sun, then the next day the moon, dark twin of the Earth, then the sun. So you have absolute proof that what the Zetas said was entirely true. So we're about to have Poleshift. The Pacific is going to narrow, the Atlantic is going to widen, and probably 60% of the Earth's population is going to die. But then all the ice will be in the wrong place and start to melt. And when it melts, the oceans are going to rise to 700 feet above present. So first you have a 600-foot tidal wave, then you have a final sea level 700 feet above present. So 60% of the people, and this is the people that live in the cities on the coasts worldwide, are going to die. Then the other people are going to be suffering from shock. They'll be in perfect health, but their rug will be pulled out from underneath them. They'll be suffering from shock. Then they're going to suffer from disease and starvation, and probably another 30% is going to die. And what I'm saying is that within a year after Poleshift, only 10% of the present population of the Earth will survive. And I'm hoping that your listeners will go to Zeta Talk and find the safe areas. Check this stuff out for yourself. I'm not making this up. I'm not stupid. I'm trying to warn everybody. Go look it up. Go check it out. And there's a lot of people say, I need my medication adjusted. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. I couldn't be in contact with extraterrestrials. Fine. If you don't want to believe me, don't. It's a free world. There's unlimited expansion for skepticism. Go for it. But if what I'm saying makes sense to any of you, go look into it and start convincing your spouses and your family. And if they don't want to move now, you go on a trip. Take a weekend trip to what you think is a safe area. Meet the people that live there. See if they're nice. Before it happens, Planet X is going to be separate from the sun, visible to the whole world. And when you go out the door and you look up and you go, oh my God, what's that? Mark it on your calendar because it's 50 days until Poleshift.
Okay. Now, I was going to mention that it's 9:57 and we're getting ready to, shut down, but I was going to ask you if you had any last-minute thoughts. And by the way, I got a couple of comments or questions for you, but I was going to save them for the next time you come on the air since it's already 2 till. But, yeah, in the meantime, do you have any last-minute thoughts you'd like to share?
Yeah. I realize that I'm in an unusual situation in that my partner's on the same page as I am. And I've met other couples where both are, but most people aren't. If you start mentioning this to your spouse or your children or your parents or your friends or at work, people are going to go think, oh my God, this guy's really a nut. But, like I said, I'm not stupid. I worked for the United Nations in New York on a code of moral conduct. I worked for the State of Vermont Environmental Board. I had a trial practice in Connecticut. I'm a licensed attorney. I have a science background. I went to aerospace engineering school. If I don't make sense, then something's really wrong with your understanding of life. So consider, even if you don't necessarily believe everything I said, that it's all connected, and that as soon as the cover-up of Planet X is broken, the cover-up of extraterrestrials is going to go the same day. So that's what everyone should be trying to do is break the cover-up. Then the governments would be announcing that we're all in danger and we have to move inland. But until then, it's just going to be you and your friends and your family, and they're not going to be ready. So you know what to do. Go find a safe place to move to, meet some people there, make a decision, would this be a good place? And before it happens, see if you can't establish some sort of a way of making a base for yourself there and a new start for yourself there. And then when it does happen and your family goes, oh, damn, you were right. God, what do we do now? You say, well, let's all meet in this place because I've already checked it out for you.
Okay. Well, listen, as I can see, it's 10 o'clock now, and we kind of run out of time. But you know what? It's been very interesting listening to you, Johnny. And, all the information you got on this here, we could probably put it on, 10, 15 more shows before we got it all out. It's just, a lot there. You were compacting how many 100,000 years of information into a 2-hour show. You just can't do it.
Exactly. Well, I told you I'd come back if you want me to, and I'd be glad to. And, I think this is, there should be a lot of interest in it because, there's a lot more proof. I didn't even really get to discuss what's going on with the magnetosphere simulator, but that's a NASA website, a government website, and it shows clearly there's something in between the Earth and the sun. So there's so many things I could discuss, but believe me, there's lots of proof. I'm not making this up, and I hope that anyone that's interested starts doing their own research.
Right. And I would recommend to anybody that's skeptical, and folks, I'm all for skepticism. I think it's very healthy. I just say to people who are skeptical, you should check it out. You should never just say, I'm skeptical and leave it go at that. If it's BS information and you don't check it out, you're missing a chance to reveal something that needs to be revealed. If, on the other hand, it turns out to be good information, well, then you missed out on something you should want. So, for me, being skeptical is not enough. Check it out. Find out for yourself. Make sure your facts. Anybody can make a mistake. Anybody can deceive, intentionally or unintentionally. So, yeah, I'd be skeptical of everything. I don't care who says it. But, hey, just, be fair and check into it and, prove or disprove it for yourself is what I recommend. Gordon, I'm going to call it a night on this one. Now, I'm only on here about 3 or 4 more minutes or 2 or 3 minutes, sharing some links with people, telling them who my next guest is going to be. But I'm not going to hold you up for that. I know it's got nothing to do with your, thing, and you got a family sitting there in the room with you or in the house with you that I'd like you to be able to get back with. And I will be in touch with you about coming back on my show. And if somebody does cancel, and they got a day or two's notice on it, I'll give you a notice so you can fill in.
Okay, great.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Gordon.
Well, thank you, Royce. I hope I got some people really interested in this subject.
Oh, I think you did because they were chatting in the chat room.
Great.
I can't say they agreed with you 100%, but I don't think you expected them to.
No, if everybody agreed with me, if I woke up one day and everyone agreed with me, I think I was in the twilight zone.
Yeah, but the important thing is they're talking about it, and that's what counts, because talking leads to, research, and research leads to knowledge.
Right, exactly.
So, all right, well, we'll talk at you later date, and folks, don't cancel out of the chat room quite yet. I got some more information like I do every show, and I'd like to share it with you. And Gordon, we'll talk with you later.
Okay, good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All righty, folks, like I always do, let me double check and make sure I haven't disconnected myself from the show. No, I'm registering. I should still be here. Want to let everybody know that my show this coming Saturday is going to be with Kingsley Dennis. He's got a new book out called The Struggle for Your Mind. And in fact, I just started reading it. I just got it today, much less started reading it today. So I've got a lot of reading to do between now and Saturday to be up to speed with it. Also want to remind everybody now that's Saturday at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. To help people who are listening right now, as I'm closing this show, it's 10:04. You look at your clock now and see if you're 1 hour ahead of me or 2 hours ahead of me or behind me, and then you can calculate it from there what time 1 o'clock is in your time zone. Want to remind everybody to go to the left-hand side of this web page and look at the navigation menu where it's the one that says Home, About the Host. Follow it down to Other. You'll see a link that says Friends. I've got 3 banners listed on that page that are linked to friends' websites of mine that I put in plugs for every show. One of them is the Alien UFO Community. The other is Supernatural UFO, and then there's United Paranormal International. And if you click on those links or those banners, they'll take you right to their web page. And those are social networks or their forums, one of the two. Great people there. I think you'll really enjoy it. And also, if you go down to the radio favorites link, these are shows that I know the host personally. They've either been, actually, all but one of these have been on my show, and the one that hasn't, I still know them personally. They were great guests for me. They're great radio show hosts. One of them's or 2 of them's actually an Arthur, and I think you really enjoy checking out their show. One is UKPN Radio with Gary Brown. Another one is Jim Harold. His show's Around the Campfire. And he also has a book out called True Stories Around the Campfire. Very fascinating book for people that like to tell campfire stories. It's great to take camping with you. Then there's the Gralian Report with Micah Hanks, and he has a book out, the Mysticism, Magic in the Molecule, I think, and I don't have it in front of me. I might be gooping it up. And his radio show is the Gralian Report. Then you got Ohio Exopolitics with Mark Hamill, and he's a great host. And the only other thing I could think of I would want to remind y'all about right now is to pay a visit to the people over at UFO, World UFO Today, and don't forget to celebrate UFO Day. With that, I'm going to call the show quits for now, and I'll be back Saturday, and I'll be posting Saturday's show probably tomorrow or the next day, most likely tomorrow. Everybody have a good night, and take care, and hey, I want to thank y'all for coming. I couldn't have a show without you any more than I could without my guests. Actually, yeah, my guests. I had to stop and think on that one. Y'all have a good night. We'll see you Saturday at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time.
Years. The last time it came through is in the Old Testament. You can actually read about it in the part that's Joshua, the book of Joshua, chapter 10. Joshua says, the sun rose that day and did circles in the sky and set in a new direction. And he says that there never was a day like this before, and there'll never be a day like this again, which, of course, how in the hell would he know? So it's in the Old Testament, and the time before that, and that was 1650 BC. The time before that was the flood of Noah, and the time before that was the sinking of Atlantis. So this is something that happens regularly every 3,657 years, and it comes closer or farther from the Earth each time and causes minor or major pole shift. Now, the last pole shift in 1650 BC moved the North Pole from Greenland to the Arctic, so that's about 12 degrees. But this pole shift is going to be major. The new North Pole is going to be the eastern tip of Brazil, right where the city of Recife is. You go 100 miles offshore, and that will be the new North Pole. So this is something that happens regularly, and there's no amount of humming like, you see a lot of people say, well, if we all think wonderful thoughts, this won't happen. Well, this is like going down to the beach at low tide and humming and hoping that the tide isn't going to come back in. And, of course, it is going to come back in. And so this is a natural event. If you're interested, you can read the books of Zechariah Sitchin, translates the ancient Sumerian tablets, and they say that the Anunnaki first came here about 1 million years ago to mine gold. And they were mining gold for about 400,000 years when they said, oh, my God, why don't we use genetics to create a bunch of slaves who would be great gold miners, and let's dumb them down so they make great slaves, but they're not smart enough to realize that we aren't God, and we'll pretend to be their gods, and we'll use fear and every negative thing to enforce us being gods. And so you can read all about this in the Anunnaki, and I don't want to get into a discussion of religion, but if you really look at that information from the ancient Sumerian tablets, there's thousands and thousands of them, and most of them were found and translated by German, English, and French archaeologists over 150 years ago. So they were sitting there, and of course, 150 years ago, they didn't know about space travel. They didn't even know about flight. So they were reading a lot of these things, and they translated them according to what they knew 150 years ago. It was Zechariah Sitchin that went back and goes, oh, my God, these people are talking about spaceships. They're talking about extraterrestrials. And so he went through them all and retranslated them and wrote a series of, I think it's 8 or 9 books that are quite available. Unfortunately, Zechariah died 2 years ago. But I had called him up personally to talk to him, and he said, I'm not talking to you. And I said, why? And he said, well, if you tell me something and I later put it in one of my books, whether I intend to or I do it accidentally, then you might sue me, and I don't need any more lawsuits, so I'm not talking to you. So that was kind of harsh. But
sounds harsh.
But anyway, they came here and created lots of Adams and Eves and experimented, and then they had us all mine gold. Well, Google Earth has discovered they've discovered so much stuff looking at satellite pictures of Earth. They discovered near the major gold fields on planet Earth in South Africa, they're the ruins of a city that are of at least 250,000 years old, and the city's 250 miles by 150 miles. And it's made of stone, and it's right next to the gold fields, and that's obviously, it had a population of up to 2 million people, and that was obviously what they did for mining gold. And evidently they make it into a powder, and I write, gets posted on UFO Digest. And they do a wonderful job, Robert Morningstar and Dirk. So
UFO Digest is Robert Morningstar's website?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Thanks.
Yeah. So anyway, and people just attack all the time. In one sense, there's a big government cover-up. So obviously the leaders of the world are all reading Zeta Talk. All the members of Congress are reading Zeta Talk, and they're whispering about it in the halls of Congress. And if they start talking about it outside of Congress, then they get they don't come down, as Howie Carr in Boston, the columnist says, they don't come down for breakfast the next day. And that's Senator Stevens in Alaska started talking too much publicly. And wouldn't you know it, he died in a plane crash. So, you really got to be careful if you want to play the power game with the elite, and then you want to start talking about what they say should be secret. Now, of course, I'm not part of the elite, so I'm going to just say what the hell I think is the truth, and you can evaluate it for yourself.
Actually, now that you mention that, this could just be a bad memory, but didn't you and George Norrie have words one time about a difference of view of opinions and both of y'all being outspoken?
No, I never had a problem with George, actually. It's funny because I didn't meet his aunt, but and this should be of interest for those who are interested in the paranormal, is I taught myself telepathy. Now, you can't go to school for it, and I don't really know how to tell anybody exactly how to do it, but the point is you've got to become sensitive to other people. You have to be able to empathetically put yourself in other people's shoes and attune yourself. So these are words that, there aren't any definitions of them, and it's not like you can go to class for it. But the people who know who's calling when the phone rings before they pick it up, they know what I mean. And when you're in a close relationship and you've got a really close relationship with your spouse or a really good friend and you know what the other's thinking, that's sort of the beginning of it. And you just got to start practicing that and tuning into people. And so anyway, I had, for people who don't know who I am, I'm not selling anything. I don't have a website. I don't have any books. So I'm not doing this for money. It's because this is very exciting information as far as I'm concerned, and I can't wait to share it with everybody. In terms of my background, my father was the inventor of the field of package design and industrial design. And his most famous product that he ever did was he invented the flip-top box for cigarettes, and he did the package for Marlboro. And that by itself is the single most valuable brand in the entire world, and it was my father that came up with it. 80% of the women that look at the package see a house, and 90% of the men see a mountain. Since the day it came out, it's been the #1 brand in the world, without a doubt, and the second most valuable brand, in case you care, is Budweiser beer.
I tell you what, I quit smoking and drinking 3 years or 3.5 years ago. So actually, it'll be 4 years in July.
Well, you're a smart man because the alcohol will not help with telepathy or being psychic. I can tell you that right now. I still smoke cigarettes though, so. But,
those cigarettes.
In this case, my father, he got paid very little for designing that package for Philip Morris. But he eventually did become a multimillionaire, and he always said, well, when I die, it'll be your your brother, your sisters, and your money. But then when he died, his accountant stole it all. So this was years before that guy in New York City that had the Bernie Madoff, yeah, before him, but it was the same result. So my father said, until then, you're on your own. I grew up poor. and if you want any money, you work. So I started working at age 11. So when his accountant finally stole his estate once my father died, there wasn't any money. So I don't want anybody thinking, well, this is a guy with millions of dollars. I live in a cabin on a mountaintop on the coast of Maine with no plumbing, and I heat with wood that I cut and split myself. So I'm doing the things that I'm going to be telling your listeners to do because of Poleshift. But I was a very bright student in high school. I graduated at the top of my class. College, I graduated at the top of my class. And law school, I graduated at the top of my class. And the whole time I paid for it by working as a contractor. And when I graduated from law school, I had never had a school loan, and I didn't owe any money to anybody. I was completely caught up. So I am a hardworking person. Now, when I was a young guy, I was very interested in earth science and science in general. And I was interested in aerospace engineering, and I would design and build model airplanes, gasoline-powered model airplanes. I never would buy a kit and follow the instructions. I just designed it myself, and they always worked. And then I started building 1, 2, and 3-stage rockets. The first money I ever made when I was 11, I bought a telescope and started watching the sky. And my father was Catholic, and he was married 5 times, and my mother was his third wife. Well, when he was divorced the first time, they said, well, you can't take communion, you're excommunicated. And he thought, how can God kick you out of church? So now this is long before I was born. He started buying books on UFOs, telepathy, extraterrestrials, ghosts, reincarnation, Roswell, all these things. So when I was growing up, the books that were in the house for me to read were about Roswell and ETs and dimensions and masters and ascension and all this stuff. So that was, and turns out it was a great interest of mine, and nobody else in the family was interested. So over the years, my father and I became closer than father-son, closer than brothers, closer than best friends. And we could just sit together for hours talking about this stuff. So I did grow up with not only a tremendous interest in it, but somebody to share it with. So in that sense, I was not the black sheep of my family, whereas I know a lot of your listeners, as soon as they start talking about this stuff, their spouses or their kids or their parents think, well, you ought to have your medication adjusted. It's
well, yeah, I've had to have my medication adjusted when I was a young child too, but not for that reason. I actually didn't get involved in some of this stuff until I was in my 20s or so. But I'm glad that you had an earlier start because you had time to build up more information. But I think maybe a good place we can start this, Gordon, is why don't we tell them about Planet X and the Poleshift and, you know, the part they play in making all this other stuff to prepare, you know, necessary. And what part does Planet X play in the Poleshift?
Okay. Planet X is the modern name for the planet Nibiru, which is the ancient Sumerian name for a planet that trails twin strands of moons, rocks, dust, and petroleum oily. So it's an oily dust. It's an iron ore oxide dust. Planet X is a planet that's approximately 29,000 miles in diameter, and it's oceanic. It's got oceans, deep oceans on it. It's got volcanic rifts, and it has tall, selfish humans. And it comes through the solar system every 3,657, put it in their upper atmosphere, because when they leave the solar system, it can get cold in space, not being near a sun or a star, and so they use that to insulate the planet. But because it's such a big planet and it has such deep oceans, it does stay warmer than you would think. But it is a 3,657-year cycle before it goes away and comes back. And this is the period we're in right now. They're back.
Right.
So they are banned since the Old Testament, since Jehovah was the last evil, selfish, extraterrestrial, pretend God that we had. And they are banned from coming back. And they aren't banned in the same way that they got a notice from Central saying, here's your official notice, don't try to go to Earth. Instead, every time they try and come to Earth, wouldn't you know it, something goes wrong. Electrical short, navigation problem with the propulsion, whatever. So they finally realized that there's just no way they can come here. Now, most people who first heard of Planet X also heard in the Bible of the phrase wormwood.
Yes, I think everybody, that's in Revelation.
Right, and the thing is that's the same subject, but people have interpreted that this is a red dwarf star, 18 times the size of Jupiter, that's going to come into the solar system at some point, and even Zecharia Sitchin thought it wouldn't return for another 200 years. So the thing is, the federal government has known all along that this would happen. NASA, there's clear evidence that the people who formed NASA knew 60 years ago that Planet X was coming back. In fact, it's said that when they recovered the live alien at Roswell and took him into captivity, at that point they realized that there would be this huge calamity, this catastrophe, this apocalypse of Planet X returning, and that they've been preparing ever since. The NASA patch, interestingly enough, shows Orion on the patch, and Orion is the direction that Planet X comes from when it reapproaches the solar system. So in 1983, NASA sent up this infrared satellite called the IRIS satellite, IRAS, to look for it. And being that it might be considered a dwarf star, which, as I just said, it's not, it's a planet and it's inhabited, that they would find it with an infrared satellite. And they found it. And in December of 1983, NASA and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory had a joint press conference where they announced to the entire world, and it was in all the national newspapers, the New York Times, the Washington Post, that they were searching for Planet X and that they had found it. And it was front page news. And the very next day, there was another announcement. Whoops, we didn't find it. We're still looking for it. So when was the last time that anybody heard NASA and JPL? And for those of you who aren't aware, Jet Propulsion Laboratory was actually started by this guy, Jack Parsons. So it's also considered that it was the Jack Parsons lab. And he's a whole mystery himself. They say he died in an explosion, but they never found his body. So it's a good issue as to where he went and what became of him. But the Jet Propulsion Laboratory does all the math. NASA is basically a huge bureaucracy, and they build things and launch them, but they don't have a clue how to navigate them or where to go. And all the mathematics for the whole thing is always done by JPL. And they were the first institute or laboratory in the United States to start building rocket engines and launching missiles professionally as a full-time thing. So when NASA and JPL get together, it's NASA.
Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man. And joining me today is going to be Gordon James Gianninoto. And we're going to be talking about Planet X and the Poleshift. And for those of you that are listening out there in the chat room now, like you, Les, you might want to type in there for me if you don't mind, and let Jay know that he might need to refresh and hit the player button since he's new here, so he'll be able to hear. I'd appreciate that. Thanks. At any rate, we're going to be talking about that and about Zeta Talk and a few other things. Me and Gordon, we go quite a way back in several different groups. We see each other post all the time. We, communicate to each other here and there. But out of my whole 5 years of doing this show, or 5.5 years, this is the first time that I've actually managed to get him on my show. And this guy's been on coast to coast, and I don't know what's taking me so long to get him over here. But, Gordon, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm pleased to be on your show, Royce. You know, you've done a great job with your groups that you have and posting messages. And I know sometimes you and I get tangled up in these discussions where people don't like what other people say, and it's just never ending sometimes. But I really do appreciate, and I have been following you for a long time, and I guess you've been following me for a long time. And this is the first time, but I'm very pleased to be here, so I'm excited.
Well, I'm actually pleased to have you here, and I know that you have been involved with Nancy Leader's Zeta Talk for many, many, many years now yourself.
6 years.
And actually, you had the same theories that she did before you got involved with her show, didn't you?
Yes, exactly, and that's why she started that website in. Well, let me say who she is first of all. She's a woman in Wisconsin, a poor farmer, a very nice woman. She's got a kind of a tough exterior, so she doesn't put up with a lot of BS. But she, in 1995, she started taking questions from the public and telepathically asking them to the 100% human, unselfish Zetas who are here on Earth now in the fourth dimension, the next level up. And she telepathically asked questions from the public and then typed out their answers. And she has a website called ZetaTalk.com, and it's got 39,000 pages of questions from the public and answers from extraterrestrials. And Nancy gets upset if you ask the same question twice, so you don't want to do that. You really want to start reading Zeta Talk because that's where all the information is. And the thing is, I started looking at it in 1995 when it first came out, and I said, well, I know all of that, and I never went back. But in 2006, Janet and I were saying, who's saying exactly what we're saying? And we started looking around at all these different sites, and we went back to it, and I went, oh, my God, she and I, Nancy Leader and I, are saying exactly the same thing. So I started following it, and I'm not like, it's not like a cult. You don't pay money. You don't give money. It's nothing like, I've heard every negative thing you can say about anybody said about Nancy, and almost as many negative things said about me. But anyway, it's a wonderful site, and if anything I say interests you, besides all the various things I've said and written, if you do a Google search, for instance, UFO Digest publishes practically every email